Hey Covalence friends, time to jump into part 3 of this where we start implementing some authentication. So let's hop right to it. We last wrapped up setting up some of our database queries, and in order to utilize these queries, well, I need to create some list items. In order to create list items, I need to create lists. In order to actually have lists, I need to populate user lists, and to populate that, I have to have users. And I can't create user accounts directly through the database, or I don't want to, because I want hashed and salted passwords. So we have to implement all of Auth before I can start seeding all of this with data. So let's go ahead and get that process rolling. I need to install just a few libraries here. So I'm going to install bcrypt and its types, and then JSON web token and its types. And I think that's all I'm going to grab at the moment. All right. Well, let's go ahead and start defining some of that. Let's see. So, yeah, I'll go ahead and get started with some controllers here. Let me make some auth controllers, and let me make some API controllers. I'm only doing this folder now to, make VS Code not double stack folders, just because it would visually irritate me. All right. And let's go ahead and set up a controller here. I do need to import some of Express's typings here, so grabbing Express and its types, just so I can start creating some, handler functions. And I like using the request handler as well, just because I'm a software developer. We're lazy. I don't want to type, recres and next function individually. So the request handler type allows you to type the function with that argument, which by default will apply the types to their three, arguments. So it's convenient. And so instead of having to type this as an express request, an express response, and an express next function, if we type this function as an express request handler, we get an express request, an express response, and an express next function here as the argument. So pretty convenient. Let's see, what do I need to create a user account? I also need to import the UUID library, which I had forgotten. UUID does come with its own types installed, so we don't need to import anything else except for UUID. Or maybe I was wrong about that. Oh, nope. I guess I was wrong about that. For some reason, I thought it had its own types built in. All right, well, we'll install those. Excellent. And now we need to start pulling off the properties from the rec body. So I need an email, a plain text password, a username, and I think name. So let's go look at my types just to verify that. ID, name, email, username, password is verified. So we're taking care of that management. We're taking care of this management. So name, email, password, username, that's really all we need. So do that. Alright, and if we're missing any of those 4 properties, I'm just doing kind of a quick and dirty catch-all. Instead of validating each one singularly and sending up an appropriate error message, I'll just send up JSON response with a message property here saying missing some required fields for registration. Alright. And let's see, I don't like how it looks with my formatter, so let me actually put it up in blocks that way to actually make it separate lines. Cool. I need to also import bcrypt. And I did talk about how I wanted some email validation on this, which is kind of important for auth setup as well. So we'll need to kind of segue back to that at a later point. I'm just going to get bare bones authentication set up right now, and then when I set up the mailer service, we can go ahead and integrate like authentication based email workflow to where we can send out a link that a user can click to verify their account. Alright, so we've got bcrypt here. We've validated that everything here does, let's see, is present, okay. And I want this to be an asynchronous function, so I can use await here. Let's see, so I need to provide the plaintext password. And then with bcrypt, you can tell it the amount of salt, hashing and salting rounds to go through. You don't have to generate a salt yourself manually. The library itself will undergo that process here. Just taking that as a string argument for gen salt, so you can do it all just in one fell swoop, which is typically what I like to do. Alright, and now I guess we can start importing some of our user account queries. So import, let's see, and I typically like to, for my queries, I typically like to import, you know, every default import with a capital letter, just because it feels more ORM-like. You know, I'm not using an ORM here. I typically do a lot of my database work just queries by hand, so I still like how the aesthetic of that looks though, so I'm sticking with that. Alright, so we've also created our ID and our password, and I need to go ahead and await users.create. This is going to be an object of, you know, what our user type is, and most of it's kind of the same. We have the ID, name, username, email, and the password. You got to be really careful with this, y'all. Can't use your ES6, you know, object shorthand here, because the password variable it would interpret would be, well, the password variable, which is just our plain text. So hashed is the actual value we need to provide for the property named password here. And then is verified, we'll set to 0, which, by the way, that little unioning type here, I said it was going to be 0 or 1, so it's pretty cool because we get IntelliSense on that, which if we just had this as a number, it wouldn't accept, but here I specifically said it had to be, you know, 1 or 0, so. And in the event that we do have an error, this is going to be a database error. So the error object here is going to be of the type MySQL error, and that means we have an error.SQL message property that'll be pretty helpful in determining what that is for the user. So let me just go ahead and do this over here. Now, just with how catching works in the Node ecosystem, like, you can throw anything. You're not always going to receive errors thrown, which is terrible. You should always throw an error, but you could throw a string, a number, whatever. So errors by default are going to be unknown. So here, what I can do is I can save the value of error to a new variable that I cast to the MySQL like error data structure. That means that everything here will have IntelliSense on what exactly it is. But as far as like casting this, like, it's a little weird. And I hope the next few generations of Node and TypeScript kind of get things figured out, or at least the community starts not throwing non-errors. But so here we set this variable error equal to error, and we just cast it to a MySQL error. So that means that here and here, we now get full IntelliSense on what exactly it is. And so this is the property I was talking about, that SQL message property. But in the event that the user is able to be created successfully, we'll go ahead and send up a response. I'll send up a 201 here. And I'll also bounce the ID up. Chances are we probably won't do anything with that, but we're going to kind of like earmark this for later because we do have to re-implement that email-based authentication workflow. Oh, whoa. Speaking of which, I don't know why I did 1 here. Sorry. Verification status. We need to remain falsy here. I don't know what I was thinking, guys. So alright, but here is our registration controller. Alright, let me make a login controller now. Alright, request handler. Alright, and when we're logging in, what am I doing? When we're logging in, I want to give my users the flexibility of being able to log in either with an email or a password. And so we'll need like a regular expression to determine that. There are a few different things we could do, but, you know, why reinvent the wheel? Hey, copying and pasting from Stack Overflow in a YouTube tutorial. All right. Some of these regular expressions can be pretty gnarly, and you got to be careful with the regular expressions. They can be malicious. That's actually a type of attack vector, regular expression denial of service, where some people can put in what they call a greedy, like a recursive regular expression that can crash your server, which is pretty funny. This one looks, you know, safe enough, but then again, so do regular expression denial of service ones, so who knows, but it's compliant with some RFC standards. And I mean, it seems good enough for me, so I won't harp on it too terribly much. Alright, so we create a regular expression variable for that. Let's see. And what I'm going to be doing from the client side is I'm going to send down rec.body.email regardless of whether or not they type in their, username or email. That's just the field that I'm sending it down. And this regular expression here is going to let me determine whether or not it was, an email versus a not email, in which case we assume that we need to look up things based on the username. So can't remember if it's string.match regular expression or regular expression.match string. And I'll just do a quick cast here, so that way TypeScript knows that email here is going to be a string itself. Although we can have it automatically infer that, and I can have some runtime checks in place if I actually validate this data. So let me go ahead and do that. So I can check to see if the type of email does not equal string. And then I'll do the same thing for password. So given that I'm validating type of here, that does mean that TypeScript will be able to automatically infer that email is a string beneath this. So I'll send like a generic-ish, message just for starters. All right, but now I can run email.match and then give it the email regular expression itself. And it either returns null if there isn't a match or an array of matches. I don't really care about what's in there, but I do care just about the truthiness factor. So this is a truthy entity, null is a falsy entity, so we can just use matches as our determination for which column to use. So and maybe matches is a bad name. I'll call this is email. So I'll do a ternary and say if is email, I want column to be the string email, otherwise it'll be the string username. Alright, and for some reason, if we have like a database error, we'll just send out a generic little message here, but otherwise we have the email or username, and we know which one it is, and the password. And so that's enough for us to go ahead and extract out that user's info from the database, see if they exist. Then if they do, we'll take bcrypt, we'll hash and salt the plaintext password we received and see if that matches up. And once that does match up, we know we have the correct user, and if not, we'll send up a generic like 401. So we do need bcrypt in here now. And I do also need to import my users queries. So yet again, I just like the capitalization of all of my tables. I just like how it looks. So we'll await users.find which column? Oh, well, conveniently enough, this first argument that I have to provide has to be a string, either email or username. Conveniently enough, we've got that as a variable called column. And second, the value is going to be, and I know I said email, if it's a username, it's going to be rec.body.email. If it's an email, it'll be rec.body.email. So it's all the same. This needs to be an async function. And since this does return an array, because every select you run with a low-level driver like this is going to return an array, then user must be array destructured out. In the event that I don't find anything, if it's an array of 0, if I have a bad email or username, well, array destructuring an empty array gives you undefined, so we need to validate that. And I don't want to, so this is a workflow that kind of like drives me absolutely bonkers on a bunch of websites these days. And I guess it's really not that bad because it only applies to like an online brute force attack versus an offline one. But when sites validate your email first before validating your email and password together, drives me crazy, especially when it breaks it up into like 2 distinct separate forms, which like breaks a lot of password manager workflows. It drives me crazy because you potentially give, an attacker a square root of the amount of attacks to do if they're just kind of brute forcing a combo list of emails and like the top 1,000 most commonly used passwords. So it drives me crazy. But it's for that reason as well that I also like to just send like the same response here regardless of what fails. So for me, if somebody fails my authentication, they're not going to know if it was the email that failed, if it was a valid account or not, or if it was the password, which, yet again, it's only really applicable to like online brute force attacks, so you should be doing like rate limiting and potentially even locking of accounts as other, mitigation techniques, but sorry, that was a off side tangent, but yeah, so here I'll send up a 401, send an object with a message property saying invalid credentials. But once we do have that user object defined, we'll go ahead and see if we can rehash and salt the plain text password we've got here to match up. So I'm creating this variable here, credentials match, and we're going to use bcrypt.compare. We need to provide the plain text password first. So that's password from the rec body. Then we have to send it the hash, which is stored on the user object dot password property. All right, and if they, actually are legit users, great. Otherwise, guess what? If the credentials don't match, I'm going to copy paste this. That way I send the exact same structure down to the string like text here, no period here, no period here, capital I there, just keeping it the same. I don't know, it's something that like is kind of a moot point, but it still drives me crazy, so I'm overly emphatic about that in some of my videos. Alright, now I want to put some information in a token and sign that, so I need to create, let's see, a payload in that token, and I'm not sure what I'll put in it at the moment, but at the very least the ID is going to be of the type that the user ID is. Honestly, I might just leave it as that for now. We can adjust that, later, but for now, we'll let it be. So I need some more stuff in my env. I need a secret classical hunter 2. I need to go ahead and create a config file for that. All right. And I'll go ahead and make an expiration one as well, just because I'm going to change that up between environments. So locally, I might have this as a few minutes. But in development, I might have that be a little bit shorter. So I'll go with like 15 minutes here. We'll go with that. All right, so we've got my token config here. Import token config. Import, let's see, payload from types. And then import JSON web token library. All right, just move in libraries first, my stuff second. Cool. All right, once we've determined that we've got the valid credentials, let's go ahead and create a token. So const token is equal to jwt.sign. Needs the payload, which for us, I want an object whose format is of the type payload. Actually, let's make it a little cleaner and a little more abstracted. Payload requires the ID. Well, we've got that here. Oh, I don't know why I thought we had that in scope. We do, but it's on the user object itself. And that's all I've said goes in this token for now. However, if I do decide to update it later, we've got that global single source of truth here. I adjust payload, and it's going to yell at me and cause an error in this file until I update it with the required info. All right, we've set an expiration for our token, so we no longer have to deal with the potential for a forever token, which is not great. We definitely don't want those. All right, so we now have the ability to register a user and log in as a user. So next up, we have a little more that we need to do, creating some custom middlewares. So that way we can, actually validate the token that's getting sent, and that way we can, actually utilize it in some of our downstream requests. So we're getting closer. We've got to go through some of the, more nitty-gritty controller workflow for creating and logging in as users, but we're slowly building up some momentum to getting some actual functionality happening. So if you liked this video, go ahead, subscribe. If you've got some comments you'd like to add about maybe some features, yet again, you guys might beat me to the punch with some feature ideas that I might actually want to implement into this app, so I'd love to hear from it. So if you do have any creative ideas, please feel free to let me know. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next edition.